I was chained beneath the stone cellar of the southern pack. Cold. Damp. Forgotten. My wrists were torn and crusted with blood, the metal biting deeper with every breath I dared to take. I no longer cried. That part of me had died long ago, buried in the silence that became my lullaby. All I knew was darkness, and orders. Obedience was survival. They told me I was born with no name. No wolf. No lineage. Just a mistake of nature. A waste of space wrapped in skin. I had learned the rules young: speak only when spoken to, never meet an alpha's eyes, and never, ever ask questions. Questions were punished. Questions meant you still believed you mattered. By 8, I was mopping blood off the warrior barack floors. At 10, I was serving meat I wasn't allowed to eat. By 13, I had become little more than a shadow in the Omega quarters. If I blinked too slowly, I was slapped. If I breathed too loudly, I was whipped. On my 16th birthday, I waited for the signs. The shift. The hell. The rush of heat and fur that meant I belonged to the wild like the others. But the moon passed in silence, and I remained human. Broken. Unworthy. So they branded me. Right above my collarbone, where no cloth could hide it. The word still burns in my memory like fire pressed against flesh, owned. I remember the smell of smoke that day, the way the iron hissed against my skin as they forced me to my knees. I didn't scream. That had been beaten out of me years ago. The Southern Pack was known for its strength. Its cruelty. And I was the ugly secret they kept locked in a cage beneath the old council house. No name. No mate. No wolf. Just a girl with bruised ribs and a soul so cracked, even the moon had turned her face from me. But what they didn't know, what even I didn't know, was that something inside me was watching. Waiting. Waiting for the right moon to rise. And it all changed the night he arrived. The night the Alpha King came. It started with the air. A strange pressure, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I felt it through the cracks in the stone walls. Heard it in the restless howls outside. The Southern Pack was hosting a gathering, an annual council between the great territories. Alphas from the east, west, and north were invited. It was meant to be a celebration of power and peace. But beneath the surface, it was a silent war of dominance. We, meaning the slaves, the Omegas, the lowborn, were told to prepare the halls. To cook. To clean. To disappear. And then, he arrived. His name was Kale. The Alpha King of the North. They said he was ruthless. A warborn leader who had risen from blood and ice. They said he could crush a wolf's spine with a single blow, that his pack moved like ghosts, that he ruled not just with strength, but with silence. I didn't expect to see him. Slaves were never allowed near the council rooms. But fate, it seems, doesn't ask permission. That night, the Southern Alpha, Darien, decided to show off. To parade his dominance in front of the council by displaying his control over the weakest thing in his lands. Me. They dragged me from the cellar like a trophy. Dirt-streaked, dressed in rags, chains clinking around my ankles. My knees bled as they shoved me onto the marble floor of the grand hall. The lights were too bright. The room spun. I kept my eyes low, knowing better than to look into the eyes of wolves. Just a thing, Darien boomed, voice thick with pride. A feral girl born on our borders. Useless. But still ours. Laughter echoed through the hall. And then, silence. One voice broke through it. Smooth. Cold. Commanding. Raise your head. I didn't move. Another order came, not in words, but in touch. A hand. Warm. Gentle. Lifting my chin like I was made of glass. I resisted at first. My instinct screamed. No one touches gently. No one looks softly. But I opened my eyes. And there he was. Kale. He didn't flinch. He didn't mock. He didn't look at me like I was a beast to be pitted or a toy to be used. He looked at me like I mattered. Like I was something lost, now found. She is not yours to give, he said to Darian, his voice low, but it cracked the silence like thunder. She is claimed. The room exploded in outrage. Claimed? Me? The Southern Alpha barked laughter. Claimed? By who? She's nothing. And that's when Cale drew his sword. With one word, everything shifted. The ground shook. Wolves growled. Chaos rose. And in the middle of it all, I ran. Barefoot. Bleeding. Blind with panic. The screams followed me down the marble halls, echoing off stone walls like a chorus of nightmares. Wolves snarled. Swords clashed. The scent of blood was thick in the air, metallic and hot. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. All I knew was that fire had reached the council house, and the world I'd known for 17 years was collapsing in flames behind me. My chains clanked as I stumbled through the servants' wing, past the kitchens and storerooms, the hidden tunnels only lowborns knew. My lungs burned. My knees buckled. But I didn't stop. Not even when I heard the first explosion. The northern wolves had brought fire. Controlled. Precise. Ruthless. They weren't here for war. They were here for me. I crashed through the outer gate, panting, half mad with fear. The cold night air slapped me awake, sharp and unforgiving. The moon hung overhead, pale and swollen, watching like a silent witness. Somewhere behind me, someone shouted my name. No, not my name. A name I hadn't earned. Girl. That's what they always called me. Girl. Slave. Thing. But this voice was different. It didn't command. It called. I turned sharply, heart pounding. And there he was. Cale. Blood streaked down the side of his neck, glinting against his silver armor. His blade dripped red. His wolves circled the clearing like shadows. One by one, the southern guards fell, overwhelmed by speed and silence. I tried to run again, but I didn't get far. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the earth, shaking, waiting for the blow. But it didn't come. Instead, arms. Strong. Gentle. Wrapping around me like warmth itself. He lifted me like I weighed nothing, cradling me against his chest. I could smell smoke on his skin, sweat and frost and something ancient. His heartbeat thundered beneath my ear. I didn't understand. I didn't trust it. Let go, I rasped, struggling weakly. Don't touch me. He didn't tighten his grip. He didn't shout. He just held me. You're safe now, he whispered. I promise. And for some reason, I believed him. I woke to warmth. Soft blankets. Flickering firelight. A room I'd never seen before. I sat up quickly, the panic already swelling, but my chains were gone. My wrists were wrapped in clean bandages. My clothes were new, simple linen, but soft. Untorn. White. I wasn't in a cage. I was in a chamber made of stone and wood, scented with pine. There were books on the shelf. A basin of clean water. A tray of untouched food. And sitting by the hearth. Cale. He didn't rise when I startled. Didn't rush to speak. He simply looked at me. Not like a prisoner. Like a storm waiting to pass. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. He just tilted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. Nothing, he said. You've already given enough. I didn't believe him. Not yet. Because men like him, alphas like him, didn't do things for free. They took. They broke. They commanded. But Cale never raised his voice. never reached for me unless I allowed it. He brought me books, blankets, soft bread with honey. He sat quietly in the corner while I learned how to sleep without flinching. For weeks, I didn't speak. For weeks, he didn't force me to. One night, I found him outside the cabin, staring at the moon. His wolves, those terrifying, silent shadows, stood at a respectful distance. He turned as I stepped into the snow barefoot. "You should be warm," he said, gently. "I'm not cold," I replied. And it was true. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shivering. The cold didn't bite. The night didn't scare me. I didn't feel like a slave anymore. I felt like something was changing. He looked at me differently that night. Not with pity, but with awe. Like he was seeing something not yet born. And then, the moon rose full. And everything broke open. It happened all at once. My body burned. Bones cracked. I collapsed to my knees in the snow, screaming as my spine arched and my fingers curled. Cale was at my side in seconds. "Let it come," he whispered. "Don't fight it." I couldn't. I didn't have the strength to resist. So I gave in. And I changed. Fur erupted across my skin, white as starlight. My limbs stretched. My senses exploded. My scream became a howl that shattered the sky. I was a wolf. For the first time. Glowing. Radiant. Ancient. When I opened my eyes, the world was clearer, brighter, deeper. The trees whispered. The stars hummed. I stood tall, wild and free, the snow beneath my paws glowing like silver dust. Cale stepped back, stunned. His voice trembled. "Lunaris." I shifted back, panting, collapsed in the snow, too weak to move. What does that mean?" I gasped. The seer answered. A woman cloaked in midnight, eyes like frost, stepped forward from the trees. "It means," she said slowly, "you are the last of the Moonborn. The line thought extinct. The wolves of light. The ones blessed by the first moon herself." I couldn't breathe. "Your blood is sacred," she said. "Feared. Hidden. Hunted." And in that moment, the truth finally surfaced. I wasn't nameless. I wasn't broken. I was powerful. And I was born of the very line my captors tried to erase. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in front of the fire, skin still aching from the shift, breath shallow, heart racing. Cale had wrapped a cloak around my shoulders, but even the warmth of his presence couldn't soothe the storm inside me. Moonborn. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like trying to speak a language I didn't know I carried in my bones. All my life, I was told I was nothing. A mistake. A stray without a name. But that was the lie. The truth? My blood sang with ancient power. The seer, her eyes glowing like twilight frost, sat beside me in silence until the flames burned low. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but each word struck like thunder. "You were never supposed to be found," she said. I looked at her, hands trembling. "What do you mean?" "You are the daughter of Lunaris," she replied, the final echo of the Moonborn line. "Your blood was sacred, powerful. And dangerous." I shook my head, trying to understand. I was abandoned. Left on the borders. No scent. No claim. "You were hidden," she corrected. "To protect you. The Southern elders feared what you were. Your very existence threatened the power they hoarded." I froze. A cold realization slithered down my spine. "My mother?" I asked, voice cracking. The seer's gaze turned heavy. "She was a healer. And a Lunaris wolf. Beautiful. Kind. Too trusting. She fell in love with someone she should have feared." My mouth dried. I already knew what she would say next. Alpha Darien. The name hissed like poison on my tongue. My knees went weak. My father, I whispered. The seer nodded. My stomach turned. The man who beat me. Branded me. Sold me. The man who looked me in the eye and saw only shame, was the one who gave me life. He knew? I asked, my voice rising with horror. He knew who I was all this time? Yes. And he still? Chained you. Erased you. Tried to kill you before the truth could rise. I stood, pacing the room, fury rising like a scream in my throat. My whole life. Every bruise, every scar, every night I prayed to the moon for mercy. It wasn't punishment for being weak. It was fear. They feared me. Not because I was broken. But because I was whole. A living secret that could unravel everything. I turned to Cale, eyes wild. Why didn't you tell me? He stood, calm but firm. Because it wasn't mine to tell. You deserved to hear it from the stars, from your own blood. Not from me. I should have felt betrayed. But I didn't. Because for the first time, someone had given me the choice to learn who I was. Not forced. Not demanded. Given. The next days passed in a haze of memory and revelation. I saw visions in my sleep, flashes of a woman with silver hair, singing beneath the moon. Her touch was warm. Her scent like lavender and fire. My mother. I remembered her voice now, faint and far away. She had tried to run. She had tried to save me. And Darien, he killed her for it. The truth scorched me from the inside out. I couldn't eat. Couldn't think. Couldn't rest. I stared at the mark on my collarbone, burned into my skin like a brand of shame. But now, it was fuel. The fire had found a home. Cale found me in the training grounds the next morning. I was barefoot in the snow, fists raw, striking against a wooden post until my knuckles bled. You need to rest, he said. I need to fight, I snapped. He didn't flinch. Didn't argue. He just stepped beside me, unwrapped my hands, and placed a blade in my palm. Then learn. And I did. Every day. I trained until my muscles screamed, until my body collapsed from exhaustion. I sparred with warriors twice my size. I learned how to wield not just steel, but moonlight. The seer taught me to call the old magic, to walk the dream paths, to whisper to the stars. They called it mooncasting. It flowed through me like breath. Like I had never forgotten it, just buried it deep beneath years of chains. I was a fast learner. Too fast. Because I wasn't training to survive. I was preparing for war. To return. To rise. To make the southern lands remember the girl they threw away. One night, Cale watched me from the edge of the glade. I turned to him, sweat dripping from my brow, sword clenched in my fist. Why me? I asked. Why did you choose me? He stepped closer, his voice like midnight snow. Because I saw you. No one else did. They saw what they were told to see. Dirt. Weakness. Chains. He lifted a hand, not to touch, but to offer. I saw a flame. My throat tightened. They called you a slave, he said. But I saw a storm. And I knew then. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming something much deeper. A name. A voice. A legacy. Mine. The next full moon came like a drumbeat. Not soft. Not serene. It rose over the northern mountains like a silver blade, slicing through the dark. And I stood beneath it, not on my knees, not in chains. But in armor. Cale's warriors formed a silent circle around the sacred glade. Fires flickered in iron sconces. The seer painted ancient symbols on my skin with crushed starlight and snowroot. My cloak, dyed the color of moonshadow, brushed my ankles with every breath of wind. This wasn't a coronation. This was a declaration. The girl they had buried was gone. In her place stood something older. Wilder. Hungrier. I was no longer prey. I was prophecy. The ceremony was called the Awakening of the Blood. The Moonborn rite of passage. Only 3 had lived through it in recorded history. The seer told me that before she even handed me the silver blade. I didn't flinch. Pain, I could handle. What I couldn't bear, was silence. Was obedience. Was forgetting who I was ever again. I stood barefoot in the snow-covered glade, my breath steaming in the frigid air, as the seer chanted the old words. Her voice wove through the wind like music carried across time. And then, the moon answered. It pulsed. Glowed brighter. And something inside me cracked open. I screamed. Not from pain, but from release. Like a door had finally been kicked down inside me. My magic surged. Raw. Primal. Unforgiving. Light erupted from my chest, white and blue and silver. My eyes, so long dulled by despair, now glowed like starlight. And my wolf, she emerged. Not as a broken reflection of the world that tried to erase her, but as the embodiment of every shadow they buried and every spark they failed to kill. A wolf of pure white fire. The last Lunaris. I collapsed into Kale's arms after it was done, trembling, but alive. Changed. I no longer shook from fear when I looked in the mirror. I no longer wore my scars with shame. I wore them like war paint. Over the next moon cycle, I rebuilt myself. I studied every law of the Southern Territory. I memorized its borders, its weaknesses, its political allies. Kale let me lead. He didn't advise unless I asked. He trained beside me like an equal, never a commander. And when I gathered the Omegas, the outcasts, the broken, the slaves, from every edge of the north and beyond, he stood behind me without question. They came by the dozens at first. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Refugees. Runaways. Discarded wolves. All branded by cruelty. All hiding in shadows. But when they saw me, when they saw my brand, and what I had become with it, they stood taller. Straighter. Like the fire inside them remembered how to burn again. And then came the moment. The moment I had carved into my soul every night for 17 years. The return. I stood at the head of a 1,000-strong battalion. Not just warriors, but survivors. Not just howlers, but rebels. The southern land stretched before us, untouched by frost, but rotting from within. Darien still ruled, still smirked on his throne of stolen blood, still thought me dead and buried. He was wrong. I wore my white armor like a second skin, my silver crest gleaming with the sigil of Lunaris, a full moon ringed by fire. Kale rode beside me on a midnight black horse, his eyes sharp, his blade ready. But the war wasn't going to start with swords. It was going to start with truth. We didn't storm the southern gates. We walked through them. Because the people no longer feared Darien. They feared what he hid. And I was the proof. Whispers had spread of the girl with the branded neck who now led an army. The girl they called Moonborn. The girl who couldn't be broken. By the time we reached the city square, the guards didn't even raise their weapons. They stepped aside. Afraid. Or perhaps, ashamed. I walked through the gates of my old prison with my chin high, my hair braided in the style of the ancient queens. I didn't run this time. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Because I wasn't there to beg. I was there to end something. To begin something new. Inside the great hall, Darien sat on his throne of obsidian and bone, surrounded by cowards who once laughed at my pain. He rose slowly. The room froze. Because I didn't look like a ghost. I looked like a mirror of the woman he once killed. My daughter, he said, smirking with venom. Come to beg? I stared him down. No, I said. I've come to take what's mine. His eyes flickered. You think blood makes you queen? No, I replied. But power does. And they already follow me. I turned, and the doors opened. Behind me, a flood of footsteps. Every Omega. Every exile. Every warrior who had ever been tossed aside. And when the last flame turned to ash, I raised my hand and renamed the southern lands. Lunaris. Not for me. For all of us. The fires of Lunaris still glowed in the distance, flickering like stars fallen to earth. But inside the great hall, the throne room that had once felt like a tomb, I stood in silence. Not as a servant. Not as a girl with her head bowed. But as something no one had dared imagine. A queen. Not because I wore a crown. Not because I sat on the throne carved from the bones of rulers who forgot mercy. But because I had reclaimed everything they tried to steal. My voice. My name. My choice. Cale approached me slowly, boots echoing softly on the marble floor. The hall was empty now. Darien had been stripped of title, cast into exile, never to return. But Cale remained. Not as a king demanding obedience. But as a man, offering his heart. He stopped in front of me, silent. Watching. Waiting. I searched his silver eyes, the way they held stories without ever needing to speak. He had fought beside me, bled beside me, never once pushing himself ahead. And still, he didn't speak first. Because Cale never took. He waited to be invited. He reached into the pocket of his cloak and pulled out something small. Simple. A silver ring. No jewels. No inscription. Just a crescent moon carved into the center, ancient and worn. My mother gave this to me, he said softly. Said it would belong to the one who changed everything. My breath caught. He didn't kneel. He didn't beg. He only looked at me like I was the sky itself, and he was willing to walk through storms just to stand beneath it. This isn't a claim, he said. This is a choice. He held it out, not to place on my finger, but for me to decide. I stared at it. All my life, choices were stolen from me. What I wore. What I ate. When I could sleep. Who I could speak to. But this moment? This was mine. I'm not a slave anymore, I whispered. I know, he replied. I'm not a shadow. Not a whisper. Not a ghost. You never were, he said. Tears stung my eyes. Not from sorrow. But from the softest kind of joy. The kind that crept in after the storms had passed. I'm a queen, I said. Cale smiled. Then let the world remember your reign. I reached out, and took the ring. Not as his. But as me. I slipped it on my finger and stepped into the space between us. And for the first time in my life, I kissed someone not out of fear, not out of desperation, but because I wanted to. It was slow. Soft. Powerful. Like a flame that didn't need to burn to be felt. The next day, under twin moons that hung full and bright above the northern mountains, the people of Lunaris gathered. Not to crown a king. But to welcome a queen. I stood atop the stone balcony, the same one I used to scrub on my knees as a child, and looked out at the faces below, wolves, humans, warriors, omegas, children. They cheered not because they feared me. But because they believed in me. My name, I called out, was never meant to be forgotten. The wind carried my voice across the courtyard like a banner of fire. They tried to silence it. Bury it. Break it. I held out my arms, bearing the branded scar on my collarbone, the one that once Red owned. They marked me with shame. But I wear it now as proof. That I survived. That I rose. Silence swept over the crowd, hanging thick with reverence. No one owns me, I said. No one will ever own any of you again. I stepped forward, breath steady, heart loud. I was born nameless. Chained. Hidden. I looked up at the moon, pale and white above me. But I am Lunaris. Last of the Moonborn. First of the free. A roar erupted from below, howls, cheers, chants. Not for a throne. Not for blood. But for hope. That night, Kale stood beside me on the edge of the stone rampart, watching as the fires burned high in celebration. He handed me a chalice of moon wine. I took it, sipped, then passed it back with a smile. You could have ruled, I said. I'd rather follow you, he replied. Why? He looked at me with that steady, silent devotion. Because kings are remembered for what they build. But legends. He touched my hand. Legends are remembered for what they survive. I turned to him. I don't want to be a legend, I whispered. He raised a brow. No? I shook my head, eyes glittering with the moonlight. I just want to live. And I did. From that day on, I lived without chains. Without fear. Without silence. The mark remained on my collarbone. Not because I couldn't erase it. But because I chose not to. Because some scars don't make you weak. They make you true. Years passed. Not in silence. Not in chains. But in laughter. In full moons and soft blankets and voices that once trembled learning how to sing again. Lunaris blossomed like a wildflower no longer crushed beneath boot heels. The southern lands, once ruled by cruelty, now bore crops and soil cleansed by freedom. No one bowed unless they wanted to. No one served unless they chose to. The halls that once echoed with whimpers now echoed with music, with stories, with celebration. And I lived. Not as a shadow. Not as a prophecy. But as a woman. The children came first, orphans of war, of exile, of abandonment. They arrived with hollow eyes and trembling hands. I knew that look. I knew the weight of it. So I did for them what no one ever did for me. I listened. I knelt down to their level. I whispered their names back to them until they remembered who they were. And the Omegas? They became the heart of Lunaris. Not outcasts. Not background noise. They were our counsel. Our teachers. Our warriors. They bore stories deeper than bloodlines. And now, they finally had the space to speak them. We didn't erase the past. We honored it. With stone carvings of those lost. With songs passed down from broken tongues now mended by time. We didn't pretend pain never happened. We just didn't let it define us anymore. One day, a little girl with silver eyes tugged on my cloak during a market celebration. She was no older than 5. Freckles like stars across her cheeks. And she said, "Is it true you were born with nothing?" I knelt and nodded gently. I was. Her brows furrowed. "But you're the queen." I smiled. "No," I said. "I'm the girl who never gave up." Her eyes sparkled. "I want to be like you." I brushed her hair back and whispered the only truth that ever mattered. You already are. There were still threats beyond our borders. Power-hungry alphas. Whispers of rebellion. But I never ruled through fear. I ruled through memory. Because when people remember what it means to be free, they fight to protect it. They fight to keep it. And I never fought alone. Kale remained by my side. Not as a king perched above the people, but as a warrior who stood shoulder to shoulder with them. He trained the younglings. He told stories by firelight. He never needed a crown to be powerful. He only needed purpose. In the quiet hours of the night, I'd often sit on the same stone steps where I once bled. And I'd look up at the moon. She always looked back. A little brighter, a little closer, like she too had watched my story unfold. And I'd whisper to her. "Thank you. For not letting them kill me." And sometimes, when the wind was just right, I swore she whispered back. They never stood a chance. The branded mark faded with time. Flesh heals, after all. But I never hid the scar. Because I earned it. Not as a victim, but as a survivor who refused to vanish. Eventually, they wrote songs about me. Legends. Poems. They called me the Fire Wolf. The Storm Queen. The girl who rose. But I didn't care for titles. I cared for the gardens growing in the courtyards. For the kitchens always full. For the council meetings led by voices once silenced. For the laughter of children who would never learn to flinch. That was my crown. That was my mark. One winter night, many years after the war, Kale and I walked the borderlands under twin moons. He turned to me, hands tucked in his cloak, hair silvering at the temples. "You changed the world," he said. I looked out over the hills, smoke rising gently from the village chimneys, and smiled. "No," I said. "We did." He pulled me close, his voice low with wonder. "Do you ever miss who you were?" I thought of the cellar. The silence. The raw wrists. The girl who had no name. "No," I said. "But I never forget her." He nodded. "She was the beginning," I added. "But this life we built, that's the end." He kissed my forehead, and we stood there, surrounded by stars, by memories, by everything we had reclaimed. And when I'm gone, when the wind finally carries my story past the edges of this realm, they will not remember me for the chains. They will not remember me for the pain. They will remember that I rose. That I chose. That I stood before kings and said, "You do not own me." And then I built a world where no one else would be owned again. Because I wasn't just born to be a slave. I was born to become a legend. And Lunaris will never forget. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful werewolf romance tales. Share your favorite moment in the comments below, and remember, you are more than what they called you.